Throughout Bleach, we've been introduced to many different Soul Reapers with many different abilities that each possess their own stories or vast history behind them. But two of them stand out as not only integral pieces of the Soul Society's history, but also integral parts of its defense as well. One of the two being Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto, the Captain General that founded the 13 Court Guard squads that defend the Seireitei, alongside founding the Soul Reaper Academy and the teachings that so many Shinigami live by today. Ichibei Hyosube, on the other hand, is one of the oldest characters in the manga, and as a member of Zero Company, serves as the last line of defense between any would-be intruders and the Soul King that upholds the three realms, also being present for the very creation of these three realms as well. As Squad Zero was introduced into the story early in the Thousand-Year Blood War, and when Yhwach would eventually storm the royal palace to fight Ichibei after slaughtering Yamamoto, the community began questioning who exactly would come out on top in an encounter between the two. I myself do have and have had a predetermined stance on this topic for quite some time, but I won't necessarily divulge that at the moment, and will simply proceed with presenting you the information today, as this is a topic I felt like covering for quite a while now. A good place to start is talking about how the two compare to one another physically, considering that Yamamoto is more so of a physicals-based fighter, and we can go over how hacks play a major part in this comparison more so later. A good majority of the heavy lifting is done for us by the simple fact that the two share an opponent in Yhwach, especially Yamamoto, who's fought him twice. When talking about the strongest characters in the series, Yamamoto has always been a standout pick, as he has a plethora of different statements that hype him up to be the strongest Soul Reaper, which we can cover with the context of a comparison to Ichibei now. First few that should be easy enough to follow are statements from Yamamoto himself and Data Book 3 Unmasked that state that for 1,000 years, no Soul Reaper has surpassed or been born stronger than him. This doesn't necessarily pertain to this discussion, as we know that Ichibei is again one of the oldest characters in the series, who's been around before even the creation of the three realms, and therefore does not fall under the description of those within the past 1,000 years who would be weaker than Yamamoto. Aizen saying Ryujin Jaka is the ultimate Zanpakuto similarly doesn't hold much weight, considering that at this point he should have next to no knowledge of Squad Zero. He knows who they are since he's surprised by Shunsui telling him that Hikifune was promoted to Zero Company, but he has self-admittedly never been to the royal palace, nor do I imagine that the abilities of Squad Zero members would be public information in general, since Yhwach himself was taken off guard by Ichimonji's abilities, despite the fact that he and Squad Zero have had dealings in the past. Direct statements from the data books or otherwise regarding Yamamoto having the oldest and strongest Zanpakuto may more so be something to take into consideration. However, something to also factor in when looking at these statements is the time at which they are made, as Squad Zero is not yet completely introduced into the story and not really fully fleshed out either as a result. A great example of what I mean by this is how it's a little strange looking back on the fight an older Hiruzen had with both Edo Hashirama and Edo Tobirama in part 1 of Naruto, in comparison to what we've seen the Senju brothers achieve later on in Shippuden, both in flashbacks and in some portions of the war arc as well. It is similarly a little odd to look at previous statements saying Yamamoto has the oldest Zanpakuto, since Ichibei claims to possess the first evolved Zanpakuto in history. At the time these statements about Yamamoto are made, we had no way of knowing if Squad Zero even used Zanpakuto in the first place, and Rukia even says much earlier in the series, way back during the Substitute arc, that the Menos Grande are far beyond the abilities of any single Soul Reaper, and it takes the entirety of Zero Company to handle just one of them. So it seems a lot of earlier statements that may pertain to Zero Company are retconned or have to be judged on a case-by-case basis, since Kubo may not have known what he wanted to do with them yet. To go over how both Yamamoto and Ichibei perform against Yhwach specifically, for a while many in the community hypothesized that 1,000 years ago when Yamamoto fought Yhwach in the past that he must have had the Almighty, which wouldn't look too good for Ichibei considering he was one-shotted by the same Shrift. This is proven to not be the case by the new 1,000-Year Blood War anime, where we are shown the Almighty was in fact sealed away by Ichibei before the war between Soul Reapers and Quincy even began. At the very least, we know Yamamoto fought and defeated base Yhwach in the past, and he says the fake Yhwach that he fights hasn't changed at all in comparison to 1,000 years ago. This is important because while he kills Yhwach 1,000 years ago as well as the fake, the second the real Yhwach appears, he steals Yamamoto's Bankai and slices him in two with zero difficulty, meaning Yhwach now is considerably but admittedly unquantifiably stronger than he was 1,000 years ago when he fought Yamamoto initially. The only real way to quantify the difference between Yhwach today and Yhwach 1,000 years ago would be trying to assess how much weaker the fake Roid clone would be, since Yamamoto says the fake Yhwach and the Yhwach 1,000 years ago are one and the same. The Roid Lloyd brothers have powers of mimicry. As described in the manga, Lloyd can copy someone else's power and skills on top of their appearance, as we see him do in his fight against Kenpachi. and Roid, the one who acts as the fake Yhwach, can replicate memories and mind in addition to appearance. This would imply that Roid shouldn't be receiving any of Yhwach's power while acting as him, but this wouldn't make much sense if any, considering that Roid manages to beat Kenpachi without his eye patch while masquerading as Yhwach, and also doesn't die against Yamamoto's Bankai in 3 seconds. Kubo would later reveal more information about the Roid brothers and their abilities in a Club Outside questionnaire on December 14th, 2023 that reads as follows. Roid, the younger brother, has the ability to replicate the memories and look of others, but why is he capable of using Yhwach's abilities and weapons? Did he inherit his elder brother's ability? Or perhaps Yhwach gave him some of his power? Or is there another reason? The Roid brothers can each copy entirety of memory or power respectively, while everything else is copied in proportion of 70 to 80%. Just being able to copy memories or power wouldn't be of much use. In my opinion, this would still just mean that the Roid is at least replicating the power Yhwach had 1,000 years ago, but he can't be replicating Yhwach today since the real Yhwach says that he is still the only Quincy who could handle the power from stealing Yamamoto's Bankai. If Roid could be strong enough to do the same, no need to let himself get killed by the Bankai instead. Still though, Roid replicating the full power of Yhwach 1,000 years ago doesn't really give us the means to measure how much stronger the real Yhwach should be today, so I guess it's something we can move on from for now and acknowledge that even without his arm, Yamamoto is still significantly stronger than Yhwach was 1,000 years ago. Regardless, the real Yhwach, who's already stronger than he was before, would grow even more in the time between his slaying of Yamamoto and his fight with Ichibei, considering that a few of the Sternritter are killed in battle, and as is well known, the power of each and every Quincy, as well as the Soul Reapers who come into contact with Yhwach's soul, are his own, and return to him upon their demise. He is then halted in his invasion of the royal palace by Ichibei, who pretty handily defeats Yhwach to the point that he's essentially styling on him and crushing his abilities up until he awakens his almighty eyes. Something interesting about Ichibei crushing some of Yhwach's abilities as well is the fact that Yamamoto cannot crush the Medallion from stealing his Bankai. We know the Bankai Medallion should be susceptible to being crushed since we see Ichigo do it, and Yhwach claims to be the only Quincy that would be able to contain Yamamoto's Bankai, meaning any other member of the Sternritter could not do the same. Some argue Ichigo didn't actually crush the Bankai Medallion, and it's rather his latent hollow spiritual pressure in his Zanpakuto disrupting the Quincy ability of stealing a Bankai that prevented it from being taken from him, since we see the holified Bankai of the captains later on in the war arc destroy some of the Sternritter's bodies. But this can't be true in Ichigo's case since Ibern himself is also a hollow, and a Rancor absorbed into the Vandenreich's army after their invasion of Huecomundo. The reverse also cannot be true since none of Ichigo's latent Quincy spiritual pressure or abilities were unearthed up until his fight against Quilge, who also notes that Ichigo in his Fullbring Bankai is significantly stronger than he is, making it difficult to steal it as well. While Yamamoto cannot crush this as he is in his own Bankai, Ichibei is able to prevent Yhwach from taking his left half in his base form, and Yhwach also cannot fully steal his Shikai ability either. There is some added context to this battle between Yhwach and Ichibei that is important to note, but I plan to discuss that more so in a bit. It's more than fair to recognize that Yamamoto performed worse against Yhwach because he is missing an arm, which Yhwach himself does acknowledge as a point of interest, but it's more so about what the arm represents than the power provided by the arm itself. In Yhwach's own words, Yamamoto 1,000 years ago was a monster, using any and everything he could within his power to not only keep the 13 court guard companies in check, but to slay any enemy who may come across his path. But over time, this would eventually change. As the years went on, Yamamoto would grow to love more and have more to protect, ultimately making him weaker than he was 1,000 years ago in terms of his mindset as a result, to the point where he didn't want to get Ichigo involved in the battle against Aizen since he is not a member of the Gote 13, nor did he want to exploit Orihime by getting her to heal his arm. Some do argue that this perspective of Yamamoto's mindset leads to the conclusion that he didn't necessarily get any weaker by losing his arm, but this cannot be the case for two major reasons. The first is that a couple of Bleach's combat arts like Zanjutsu or Hakuda depend on their practitioners utilizing both of their arms or hands, with this being something Yamamoto attempted to impart onto Kenpachi, but we've likewise seen characters earlier in the series such as Grimmjow become significantly weaker when losing his arm, to the point that he was demoted from the Espada entirely. I do believe that a combination of Yamamoto's mindset and losing his arm did in fact make him weaker in his second battle against Yhwach, but the issue here primarily is that this doesn't necessarily matter, since Yhwach now is substantially stronger than he was 1,000 years ago when Yamamoto wasn't weakened anyway. Given that most of Yama's hype statements can't logically pertain to Squad Zero, and Ichibei fights and defeats a stronger base Yhwach than Yamamoto does himself, I believe it is reasonable to acknowledge Ichibei likely has the better stats of the two. but for the sake of conversation and because I'd like to prove a point later, let's instead say that Yamamoto could be stronger and move forward. Our next topic of discussion, and arguably the most integral when discussing this topic or any that pertains to Ichibei, is the abilities of his Zanpakuto, Ichimonji. As in line with the theme of his character as a monk in tune with the power of names, Ichimonji gives Ichibei further dominion over names and the power that resides within them. Even while sealed, Ichimonji cuts the names of what it makes contact with. This is demonstrated when Yhwach swats the Zanpakuto away with his arm, thus cutting its name in half to just an R, and having its power in the process by making it heavier for him to move with almost gentle sword swings. This admittedly does little to affect Yhwach this early in their fight, and that's because Yhwach has his own version of power null resistance where he can restore the power Ichibei took from him back to himself. Ichibei then replies to this by releasing his Zanpakuto, and his Shikai ability now robs all that his brush paints over of their names. In Ichibei's own words, that with no name has no power, meaning there's nothing Yhwach could have done here to actually damage him. His Bankai Shirafude Ichimonji takes it a step further for Ichibei to then write new names onto his opponents, bestowing upon Yhwach the name and therefore the strength of an ant beneath his feet, before sending him flying back down to the Seireitei from the royal palace. As I mentioned previously, however, Ichibei would only be promptly defeated by Yhwach opening his almighty eyes, but there are two important things to note about this fight moving forward. One is that Ichimonji, even without being released, can affect the very names of its targets, which can directly affect their power. And the second is that this ability was only countered by Yhwach specifically having the means to restore this power to himself. We briefly discussed how the two compare to one another physically earlier, but there is a major problem here, and that being, in no uncertain terms and regardless of who has the better stats, Yamamoto has no counter to the name manipulation of Ichimonji whatsoever. He cannot return his power to himself, nor does he have any means of restoring his names if he or his Zanpakuto are tagged by Ichimonji at any point over the course of the fight. This is why I stated earlier in the video that we could just concede on Yamamoto being physically stronger than Ichibei is himself, because this is ultimately an irrelevant point to this discussion. Regardless of if Yama may be stronger or not, there is no way of proving he would be so much substantially stronger than Ichibei that he can either 1. Crush the abilities of Ichimonji, or 2. Be so much above Ichibei that he could never tag Yama with his sword at all. All it takes is Ichibei reaching Yamamoto once, and he is reduced to either half power with half a name if Ichibei is in base, or he has no power with no name if Ichibei's Shikai is released. This gets even worse if you acknowledge the arguments that we covered earlier that's more so in Ichibei's favor, where once again he very clearly performs better against a stronger Yhwach, because then not only would Ichibei already begin the fight with the physical advantage, but under these circumstances the gap between the two would widen more and more as he lands more blows with Ichimonji. In a lot of cases, Yamamoto's Bankai doesn't do him any favors here either, since obviously Ichibei would alter its name, but also because Ichibei just has legitimate counters to his Bankai as well. If Yamamoto attempts to use Zanka no Tachi West to protect himself by wrapping his body in flames, Ichibei's Shikai can still control the black that is a part of Yamamoto's Shihakusho. The army spawned by Zanka no Tachi South also consists of corpses that are, you guessed it, colored black in the official colored scans of the manga done by Shueisha. Another big focal point in regards to Ichibei's ability comes from a few believing that Yamamoto's flames can actually burn Ichibei's ink off, but I myself do not subscribe to this idea, since Ichibei's ink obviously does not operate by the exact same logic or physics as the ink we utilize in our everyday real world, given that it comes out of a sword molded by the soul of a monk who is the head of the samurai Ghostbusters. So there's no real reason to arbitrarily apply the property of being flammable to it, and since we've already proven that Ichibei himself is stronger than Yamamoto on top of it, his fire wouldn't exactly Reiatsu flex the ink off either. This becomes an even greater reality when taking into account that Ichibei tagging Yamamoto with his Zanpakuto would likely alter his flames to be even weaker as well, making this even less likely. Yamamoto's greatest asset when facing off against many other characters in the series is just how much more powerful he is than everyone else for most of the story, but against Ichibei, who is not only stronger than himself but can likewise whittle down the power Yamamoto does have over the course of their battle, no real way for him to combat or win against that. How Yamamoto stacks up against the other individual members of Zero Company is a topic for its own video, potentially at some point in the future, as there is a lot more to cover there, especially now with the new Squad Zero performance we're given in the 1000 Year Blood War anime, but that's about all I really have to say regarding the topic today. I have plenty of other Bleach content on my channel, such as Yamamoto versus Aizen if you're maybe interested in hearing some Yama hype instead, and I've also done some more content pertaining to the war arc like ranking the Schutzstaffel or Ulquiorra versus Asnod, but I plan to make make more content about Bleach and a variety of other topics in the future, so subscribe for free to be notified if you don't want to miss that, or just be notified of what I may get up to in the future, such as when I upload or stream. Like this video to support both the channel and myself, as well as let me know that this is the type of content that you want to see. Comment down below if I missed anything or with any suggestions you may have for the future. Thank you all for watching, and have a great rest of your day.